friends. My name is Shawne Arceneaux, but you can call me Shawne. I'm a board-certified nurse coach and holistic healer, and I want to help you transform your life in a way that feels in total alignment with your heart and who you truly are. Each week, I'll be sharing with you my tips on how to become more empowered in your own wellness journey and create a vibrant, fulfilling life that reflects your values and your truth. You'll hear insightful interviews on different life and wellness topics and stories from myself and other beautiful souls who share my mission of spreading love and light in this sometimes dark world. My hope for this podcast is that you will walk away feeling inspired and more aligned in your purpose. This is your permission to get curious and lean into your intuition as we all learn and grow together. Welcome to the Aligned and Well podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Aligned and Well podcast. It is Shawne, your host here. I am doing a solo episode today, and I wanted to dive into this topic of vulnerability as a value. So a little bit of background here of why I want to do an episode on this topic is I shared a vulnerable post earlier this month, and I was basically participating in this trend that I saw on Instagram called social media is fake. And I'd seen a few other creators do it. It's basically a trend where people like post pictures and put captions on them and share really raw and vulnerable things about their life that they struggle with that most people might not know. And it was really inspiring to me. You know, these are creators that I admire and that I look up to. And until I saw many of their social media is fake posts, I didn't realize actually how much I was holding them on a pedestal. And it made me think about how, in general, as a society and in the age of social media, we tend to create this perception of who we think people are based off of very surface level things that we see about them in a single moment, particularly in the format of like a 60-second reel or an edited, filtered photo, right? But that's not always the full story. You know, we all know that. Every human being behind every post you see on social media has a depth to them that we totally forget about as an audience and as consumers of the internet, you know, and this is the very reason why I think vulnerability, especially now in this day and age, is an extremely important quality to embrace. And after participating in this trend and sharing some of my own vulnerable stuff to my audience, I thought about this concept of vulnerability as a value. And whenever I think about my life and the way that I've like operated in the world, the way that I've built relationships with other people, how I used to show up in my nursing career, and now how I run my business, vulnerability is usually at the top of the list of values for all of those different aspects of my life. And whenever I shared that vulnerable post, it was just really wild to me. You know, I shared it just because it was on my heart. It was inspiring to see other creators doing it, and I just put it out there. But the response that I got from it was just so moving. I was getting messages and messages from people saying like, I love that you shared that. I really resonated with it. I've experienced something similar. Thank you for sharing that. Like it just brings this level of humanity back down to all of us and into our awareness. Because I think we can really forget that the people behind the pictures that we see online are humans. Like we're human beings having our own little experiences. And I want to spend some time with you today talking about why I think vulnerability is such a high value of mine and why I think it needs to be a high value for everyone. And so there's a couple of different parts to this. I want to talk a little bit about why I think vulnerability is such an important value, why it's necessary for us as human beings to really make the most out of our very short time here on this earth. And then I want to talk about some practical things, like some steps that might help you if you are someone that finds vulnerability very difficult. Maybe you've been vulnerable with people in the past and then got burned. Maybe being vulnerable just feels very scary for you. Maybe this is something you want to start to really lean into, but you're not sure how to go about it without like oversharing. So I'm hoping to give you some practical things to walk away with today so that you can actually start to embrace being more vulnerable and deepening your relationship with both yourself and with others, and then in turn expanding your capacity um, to really experience life, the full spectrum of being human. Okay, let's just dig into them. The first thing that I think about whenever I think about vulnerability being a value and why I think it's important is because vulnerability creates an emotional connection and it helps you build trust. So I don't know about you, but whenever I am establishing a new relationship with someone, a new friendship, a new business relationship, right? Like deciding whether or not I want to keep someone in my world, whether or not I want to build or continue a relationship with someone, even like whether or not I want to buy something from someone. If someone's selling something like coaching or a product or a book, this also applies to like healthcare providers that I go to looking for who's going to be on my healthcare team. I look for an element of vulnerability. I look for their ability to be vulnerable and then also receive vulnerability from me. And that is because I don't trust people who can't be vulnerable. Um, since it's something that I personally value so highly, it's not in alignment for me to surround myself with people who aren't able to access that. And that's not to like judge or shame anything. Everybody's vulnerable in their own time and place whenever they feel the most comfortable, whenever they're ready. Um, that's just a boundary for myself. Like when you are able to be vulnerable with someone, it shows me that you are able to connect on a deep level. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later in some of the other points here too. But as humans, we crave connection, we crave community. And trust is something that is earned over time, right? The fastest way to develop that trust is to allow others in and then create that openness and that safe space for the connection to develop. And it allows you just to be heart to heart with other people. The second thing that comes to mind is that vulnerability is so important because it encourages authenticity. And so when you think about it, in a world where we are over consuming content, right? It's just constantly scrolling through our feeds. I just get this sense that we are craving, at least I know I'm sensing for myself. And I feel like there's probably also this collective craving for authenticity and realness. Because now that we have like AI and Photoshop and heavy editing and filters and things like that, it's so easy to spot when something feels fake or like not genuine, and the internet is just full of it, right? When we lead with vulnerability, not only do we get to be seen in our humanness, but we also open that door for others to be more authentic to themselves as well. We get to be kind of a part of this movement that brings us back to connection versus an environment where we're all divided and we're fighting all the time and we have different opinions and we think that anything outside of the opinion that we have is wrong. I think being authentic is like one of the big dreams and goals in life, right? Like we all want to be able to be totally ourselves and not feel like we have to change or morph into what society or other people think about us, what people from our pastor and our community expect from us. That's the dream. And that's what a lot of us as human beings want, is just to be who we are. And vulnerability really invites that. It invites the real, raw, authentic essence of who we are to come forward. And then it helps us also release the expectations of um, conditioning, and it releases us from that need to wear a mask all the time and the things that don't feel true to us. I think the true essence of vulnerability is being able to be who you are and seeing others be themselves, even if you are very, very different from each other, and being able to honor that, being able to honor our differences. Like we are all just nourishing each other and coexisting together, you know? The third thing that comes up for me with vulnerability, and the reason why I love leading with it, it's such a high value, is because it invites conversation, you know? Um, my husband kind of pokes at me sometimes for this, but like deep, thought provoking conversation is something that I need so much out of any kind of relationship, right? Like whether it's with him, with my friends and family, with my clients, with my colleagues, my team that I work with. Like I absolutely need depth. And while I do small talk really well, it's always my desire to go deeper with people and to connect on a really intimate level. And my husband kind of pokes at me sometimes whenever he asks, like, what do you want to do tonight? And my response is usually something along the lines of, like, I just want to hang out and talk about deep stuff. And then he'll just kind of giggle and say, like, about what? What kind of deep stuff are you talking about? And honestly, off the top of my head, I don't really know. Like, I don't have a list of topics that's ready to go that I can just rattle off that will lead into a really deep and thought provoking conversation. But whenever we do have those really beautiful moments, usually it's like after we put Beckham down for bed, we're hanging out in the kitchen maybe, and we put on some music, and then we just start sharing our thoughts and feelings about things. And that vulnerability allows for the conversation to keep opening and to keep getting deeper. And so I think about that whenever it comes to any conversation that I'm having, especially whenever it comes to my business. You know, if I'm willing to be vulnerable and share some of those things that are lying deep within my heart and soul, it creates this sense of safety for others to share and feel comfortable being vulnerable too, you know? And then we can have more conversations with substance, conversations that stimulate us not only intellectually, but emotionally and spiritually as well. And I love leading with vulnerability for this reason, because it makes my conversations with people just so juicy and fun and creative. Like human beings are so interesting. No matter who you are, like everyone has a story. Everyone has such a colorful past. And I just love learning about that. You know, I think it's just such a cool thing to be able to have these really rich conversations with people. And I think the more vulnerable you can be with people, and the more vulnerable other people can be with you, the more safe you feel for them, your conversations can just be that much more fun and colorful. Vulnerability is also, this is the last point, the fourth point here is like, it's the universal love language of humans, right? So it makes sense that it's a really high value for a lot of us. It allows for a deeper experience of our entire spectrum of emotionality, you know? When we can tap into vulnerability, we're opening ourselves up to both give and receive greater amounts of things like love, like pleasure, like joy, satisfaction. And I think what people are scared of is the opposite of that spectrum, right? The depth of pain, of heartache, of grief and loss that it also opens you up to if you're vulnerable. But you kind of have to think about it like this. Like if you close yourself off to one end of the emotional spectrum, right? Like if we try to protect ourselves from pain and suffering and heartache, we immediately block ourselves from accessing the joy, the love that's on the opposite side of that spectrum. Like we can't experience the full depth of those more like positive human experiences because we're not willing to experience the opposite. And an example of that comes up for me when I think about when I think about this whole concept is the possibility of like moving to another country, let's say, which is something that my husband and I are actually considering. Um, but there's like this fear that I might not adjust to the culture very well. This fear of not knowing the language, of geographically having to like relearn new environments in a place that I'm not familiar with in all ways. Having to figure out finances, right? Like how to transfer my business to a totally different country, establishing my son in an education system that I'm totally not familiar with, right? Like there's so many variables that maybe an old version of me would not be open to risking, right? Like I would not be willing to explore all of those things because it all feels so uncomfortable. It all feels so overwhelming. But the ultimate desire that I have in exploring this possibility is seeing the world, right? Like experiencing as much of it as possible. Um, Raising my son to learn how to adapt to different cultures, having a global impact as a healer and as a coach and as a light worker, right? Like creating beautiful memories with my family. And I don't think any of that would be as accessible to me, or the full experience of all of that would be as accessible to me if I close myself off to the potential challenges and the things that make me extremely uncomfortable and scared, right? And so I get to sit with this like really vulnerable moment and acknowledge, hey, there are so many of these things that I am scared of. So many things are uncertain about this like potential life change. And I fully also trust myself to be able to handle it and figure it out and lean into the full experience of it all, not just the happy and smooth parts, but also the obstacles, the deep fear, the unknown, like the scary things. I think it's so important to note that as humans, we are meant to experience all of it, right? Like we're meant to experience all of the happy things. And then we're also meant to experience the pain, the heartache, the sad stuff, the tragedy, the trauma. Like that's just kind of what happens. And I think we spend way too much time and energy trying to avoid all of that. Because no matter what, on an individual level and collectively, like it's inevitable, right? And so, how can we not look at it as good or bad? How can we look at it as a part of the human experience that we can either latch onto to keep us like stuck in this box, or we can use it to appreciate the beauty that life is, you know? All right. So, now what I want to talk about, if you are a person who finds vulnerability very difficult, but it's something you want to lean more into, right? Like I have some tips for you here for how to kind of begin that process and continue deepening this practice of vulnerability. And this is super helpful, especially if you consider yourself like a private person. You might be kind of thinking about like, okay, how do I lead with vulnerability without crossing that line of like oversharing or it being too much for me? And so the first tip I have for you is really to just know your boundaries, right? It's important to set boundaries for yourself and decide what you're comfortable sharing and what you'd like to keep private. And the cool thing about vulnerability is there's no like right or wrong way to do it. Like you set the pace. You ultimately get to choose how vulnerable to be, with whom and when. I would also I would also say to take some time to evaluate yourself and your relationships and recognize if your tendency to shy away from vulnerability is a boundary. So, for example, like let's say you have a new friendship and you notice qualities about them that immediately throw up a red flag for you, and you intuitively start to like kind of back off sharing too much with them. Like that's a boundary. And you know, for your own energy to be protected, this isn't a relationship that you're going to be taking those walls down for, and that's totally okay. Or if it feels more like resistance. So maybe there aren't any red flags with this new friendship, but you start to see the potential of both of you getting closer and closer and them learning more and more about you. And then you start to think about maybe past friendships or past relationships and your fears of them abandoning you as a friend, or not being what you thought they were, or getting close to people really scares you, so you back off and you don't allow yourself to fully be you around them because you're proactively protecting yourself, right? Like, so just be aware of which one it actually is, like what's actually present for you when you notice yourself pulling back and whenever you start to feel those walls going back up. I will say that if you are truly tapped in, if you're truly tapped into who you know who you are as a person, you are super, super clear on your values and your beliefs, and you're showing up authentically all the time, vulnerability isn't hard, right? It's easy and it's just a part of who you are. You don't feel the need to like turn it off. And there's no such thing as a vulnerability hangover whenever you reach that state, which I've heard that term used a lot, and I've actually been guilty of using this term in the past. And I do believe that at a certain level of consciousness, like vulnerability does feel so big that you do kind of have a hangover after a big vulnerable moment, right? And I also do believe that the more you normalize your authentic essence and nature and presence with people, there's not a need to put the walls back up and retreat from being vulnerable because you've created so much internal safety, so much evidence within yourself that you can pull from to show up vulnerably at any moment with any person and be okay afterwards. So know your boundaries and also have this awareness of like where you're at in your vulnerability journey. The second tip I have for you is to really connect with your intention, right? So ask yourself why you're wanting to be more vulnerable. Why do you want to share a little bit more about yourself? Like, what do you hope to achieve by sharing about yourself, your life, etc.? And make sure that your reason for sharing aligns with your values, right? Like if you're sharing from this place of, oh, this is going to get a lot of attention, or like if you're a business owner, right? And like, oh, this is going to create more clients for me or more income. Like those are not strong enough purposes for sharing and being vulnerable. And like maybe you are sharing some vulnerable things, but it's not coming from a place of like genuine connection. And people will be able to feel that subconsciously and you will be able to feel it. Like you'll feel gross. It won't feel good if you're sharing vulnerable things from that place. And it's actually what it is attention seeking and ego feeding. And that's disguised as vulnerability. You always want to come from a place of integrity and heart and genuine connection when you are sharing anything that's vulnerable. The third tip that I have here is sharing from a place of strength, right? So many people misinterpret being vulnerable as showing weakness. But I think you can still share about your experiences in a raw and vulnerable way and emphasize, what you learned and how it made you stronger rather than dwelling on the negative and staying in victimhood. And this kind of ties into my last piece that I talked about. Like people can tell even if it's on a subconscious level, right? Like people can tell when something is attention seeking or ego driven. And so don't share vulnerably so that people will feel sorry for you. Share to connect. Like if that's the true intention of you sharing, like share to start a conversation and open the door for others to share their experience too. Like when you share from a place of strength, it really invites people to see the strength in themselves and to be empowered to talk about it too, especially if they're going through or have gone through something similar to what you shared. And then the last little piece here that I have for you is if vulnerability is new for you, take it in little sips. You don't have to go spilling all your secrets to everyone in your world tomorrow, but start to incorporate more vulnerable shares and interactions with people slowly. And this is really just to help you get your nervous system to trust that you are okay and you are safe being in this vulnerable space. Like slowly building that evidence that you can be vulnerable and raw and be yourself, your authentic self, and you won't die. Okay, so just to kind of summarize, all of the reasons why I think vulnerability is one of the most important values you can have. It creates emotional connection, it helps build trust, it encourages authenticity, authentic connection. It invites a conversation, a deep conversation, a thought-provoking conversation, and it's the universal love language for all of us, for all humans, you know? And then for those of you listening who want to embrace being more vulnerable with the people in your life and just in general as you navigate your human experience on this earth, knowing your boundaries and acknowledging your resistance, connecting with your intention of why you want to be more vulnerable, why you want to share, sharing from a place of strength and not victimhood, and then taking vulnerability in little sips, slowly adjusting to tapping into that more vulnerable side of you as it feels comfortable. And so that is all I have for you today. I hope this episode was really insightful. Um, I have really been loving leading with more and more vulnerability in my business. And I just find that I feel more connected to the people that are in my world that listen to this podcast, that sign on with me as clients. Like I feel just a deeper connection, a deeper sense of purpose to this work as I am more vulnerably sharing what's present for me, what I'm going through, the struggles that I'm having. And I noticed that it invites the conversation for other people to claim that as well and for other people to be seen. Uh, Speaking of which, this is going to be a little plug here for my retreat that I'm running with Sterling Rose this summer. Uh, by the time this episode airs, it will probably be a month out from when our retreat will actually be. And I'm not entirely sure if we'll have spots yet, but if there are, I will be sure to put the registration link in the show notes. So if we do have spots open, feel free to reach out to me, to email me, to click on the link. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. This retreat is our Be Seen Women's Retreat, and it is for heart-centered women who really are looking to practice being seen for who they are. This retreat is going to be a really big vulnerability exercise for anyone who comes. And so if this is something that you are wanting to incorporate more of in your life, I think this is the perfect place to do it. We're calling in anyone in the healing space, entrepreneurs, or anyone who's wanting to just claim who they are and feel comfortable, feel safe to be who they are and let other people see it and feel the freedom to experience life as their true selves. We've got a lot going on at this retreat. We've got breath work, we've got embodiment photography sessions, we've got somatic coaching. We've got a lot of really amazing things planned. So like I said, double check our website to see if spots are still open. And if they are, make sure you register. I have really enjoyed just sitting down and talking with you guys about this really, really important topic for me. I love talking about vulnerability. Like I said, it is one of my top values in my life, in my business. And I would love to know what your takeaways are from this. If you are wanting to practice being vulnerable and sharing a little bit more about you, I invite you to email me privately. And if this sparked anything for you, if this got some wheels turning in your head, if it inspired you to want to share a really difficult story or a really difficult experience, I'd love to be the first to know. So my inbox is open to any of you who are wanting to just connect and start practicing more of that vulnerable piece. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.